In 2004, Dr. Whitten co-founded the Whitten-Newman Family Foundation in memory of his eldest son, Brandon, who passed away in 2002 as a result of a traffic accident caused by alcohol and prescription drug use disorder. In 2010, he co-founded FATE, which stands for Fighting Addiction Through Education. And he has spoken to, get this, more than 27,500 high school and college students throughout Oklahoma about the dangers of addiction. Dr. Whitten co-produced Killing Pain, a docu-series about the opioid epidemic in Oklahoma. In 2020, Killing Pain won 3 Emmy Awards. One of the driving forces behind the creation of Oklahoma State University's Center for Wellness and Recovery, a major new prevention and treatment center for Oklahomans based at the OSU Medical School, Dr. Whitten serves as General Counsel for the National Center for Addiction Studies and Treatment Foundation, and its beneficiary, the National Center for Wellness and Recovery. In addition, he is an adjunct professor at the Oklahoma State University College of Osteopathic Medicine. He has been lecturing there on the subject of addiction since 2010. Dr. Whitten is co-founder of Arcadia Trail Center for Addiction and Recovery, a state-of-the-art addiction treatment hospital in Edmond, Oklahoma. He has been the recipient of many honors due to his work to educate the public on addiction, including the Teen Recovery Solutions Preventionist of the Year Award, Oklahoma Citizen Advocates for Recovery and Treatment Association's Lifetime Achievement Award, Peaceful Family Oklahoma's Courage to Heal Out Loud Award, and the inaugural Melvin Moran Humanitarian Award from the Jasmine Moran Children's Museum. He serves on the board of directors for several nonprofit organizations. He is indeed one of my favorite people and someone that you will learn so much from today. So without further ado, help me give a warm OCCC welcome to Dr. Reggie Whitten.
Hi guys, I feel like we're already friends because I messed up your photograph by being in it. So, I gotta tell you, I'm 68 years old. I have raised 5 kids. I've got a bunch of grandchildren. I love talking to young people. You guys are the future. I'm the past. And you know, in my educational career, I sat through a lot of speakers, and this is just my personal view. A lot of the speakers that talked to me when I was in college and law school, my feeling was they were kind of know-it-alls. I hope you find my speech today to be a little different. I'm going to tell you the worst thing that ever happened in my life to one of my favorite people, my son Brandon. And I want you guys to feel a bit of a connection. I didn't feel connected with these speakers that talked to me when I was your age, but I've got a connection to this school. My son Brandon was going to school here in 2002, just like you guys are today. And he died in 2002. And I was raised in Seminole, Oklahoma. I have a couple of different messages for you guys, but I'm going to start out with this message. Trust me, you can be anything you want to be. Let me say it again. You can be anything you want to be. My parents did not graduate, either one of them, from high school. And they never knew enough to encourage me on how to make a living and how to get an education. I'll be honest with you. I got lucky. I got very lucky. I had mentors, like your president. I had mentors that guided and taught me, and I got lucky. And I dodged some other bullets too. Let me just tell you. There were temptations and things that could have taken me off my path. I got lucky. It's sort of like if a bullet whizzes by your head, you know, that's not good. It's good that you didn't get hit, but I had a few bullets kind of whiz by my head and I got lucky. My son did not get lucky. And I bet you guys will run into the same buzzsaw with someone in your family, somebody in your friends, maybe even yourself. I don't know. But what I'm going to do in my speech, I'm not up here to talk about how great I am, because I've made a lot of mistakes. I'm up here to tell you what happened. I'm just going to share my story with you. I mentioned I'm from a small town. I'm from Seminole, Oklahoma. And I don't know, you guys are probably way too young. Have you ever watched the reruns of the Andy Griffith Show? Okay. Well, when I was a kid, and it was black and white, I was watching the Andy Griffith Show, and this is Otis the Town Drunk. And I'm just being honest, I'm not proud of this, but that is what I thought an addict was. It was just a bad guy doing bad things, lazy, and no good. That's really what I thought. I don't even know where I got that from. And we've all seen people who are less fortunate on the street. And to be honest, I kind of thought maybe they ended up on the street, maybe because they didn't try hard enough. I don't believe that today, but that's kind of the way I grew up. Like I said, I'm not proud of that. You want to know the truth? I'll show you what an addict looks like. An addict looks like you and me. And almost 80%, based on surveys of people, think they have this opinion of addicts they haven't even met. And it's called a stigma. This is the definition of stigma. It's a mark of disgrace. And that's kind of how the general public thinks of an addict. But this is what an addict looks like. This guy is smart and talented, and rich, also goes by the name of Iron Man, you know? This guy, this young lady, Star Wars movies. How about Prince? How about Tom Petty? How about these people? You probably know every one of these people. They don't look like Otis the Town Drunk, and nobody thought they were just a bum. They were just people. People like us can look like addicts. Anybody, if you take certain drugs long enough and in the right dosage, you will become addicted. Let me just say that one more time. Take Mother Teresa. You probably heard of Mother Teresa, one of the greatest humans that ever lived. You give certain drugs to Mother Teresa long enough and in the right quantity, and she will become a criminal. She will become an addict. It is science-based. That is not an opinion. That is a fact. This kid does not look like an addict. Westmore High School is not very far from here. My son Brandon went to school at Westmore, graduated from there. His plan was to go to law school because he kind of looked up to me. We were very close. He wanted to be like his dad. He wanted to go to law school and practice law with me. He was the homecoming king, but he was also a little boy. That's me when I was in law school. That's my trailer house in the corner. People used to say, man, those things burn up all the time. What if you get trapped in it? And I knew I could run through the wall of that house. It was so thick and so cheap. I think we paid $2,000 for that house. And that's where I lived. And now, yes, I had more hair back then. But Brandon was just a little boy. He grew up to be a very handsome young man. That is his sister, Hannah, on my right, who is a lawyer today, sitting right here. And that was Dylan's brother, or Brandon's brother, Dylan. He was just an ordinary guy and had an ordinary childhood. He was the homecoming king, here he is. And yeah, I was a Sooner. I ended up going to OU. He played at Weatherford, not terribly far from here, on a Division II national championship football team. Played and started. He was quite the football star. And this is the night they won the national championship. There he is with two of his siblings. I was in the audience. It was a very exciting moment in my life. This is not Otis the Town Drunk. No way. How could he be, right? You know, in almost every picture that I had of Brandon, up until this time, he was smiling in those pictures. This was a happy guy. But he ran into a buzzsaw. And he wasn't smiling here, and I didn't know why, and I really didn't notice it, you know? But something had changed. I found out kind of the hard way. So I get a phone call one night after midnight. You know, Brandon's a grown man. I used to stay up when he was 16 worrying about a car accident, but not now. But I got a call. Brandon was in a car wreck, and that's his car in a little creek, and he had this beautiful 20-year-old girlfriend that he loved dearly, and they were both hanging upside down from their seatbelts. And there was a little creek there. You couldn't hardly even see that water, but it was there, and they almost drowned. So Brandon was able to extricate his girlfriend, and they got out. They were both hurt. So I got a call. Let me back that up and finish this story. I got a call. He was at the hospital. By the time I got to the hospital, of course, I didn't know what happened. I saw this young lady and her mother. They were there, and she did not have a mark on her body. And I thought, thank the Lord, she's going to be okay. But she had been intubated. They had stuck a tube down her throat because she had all that dirty water in her lungs, muddy, you know. So, but I still thought she was going to be okay. And I gave her a hug. And she couldn't talk because she was intubated, but she had a little blackboard. She wrote me a note, "How's Brandon?" And I said, "I don't know, honey. Let me go check on him." And Brandon, I thought, had been hurt more seriously than she had. He almost had his right arm amputated. But he was conscious, and you know, I am a lawyer. I have to ask questions. That's what lawyers do. So once I found out, it looked like he was going to survive, I asked what happened. And he was very honest at that point. Here's what happened. In the weight room of the national championship football team, they were taking, after practice, they were taking pills, prescription pills. And they were passing them around, and the aches and pains of football, they all kind of thought that made it better, and they had a flask, and they would drink out of that flask and pass it around. Now, this was a prescription bottle. Brandon didn't have a prescription. He wasn't sick. It wasn't his pill. It wasn't his doctor that prescribed it. And he got hooked. He didn't think he could get hooked. I didn't think he could get hooked. I didn't think that was a real thing, you know? I just thought people did this on purpose, you know? But that's what happened. And that night, he had taken another pill and had a drink and was driving. The car ended up upside down. That's what happened. I was pretty mad at him. So the days went by. Brandon got out of the hospital on crutches, but the little girl did not. This is a little girl that Brandon loved dearly, 20 years old. He was planning on marrying her. It turned out she got an infection in her lungs, and I didn't know what this was. It was a staph infection called MRSA. It's a very serious infection. The days and the weeks went by, and I got a call from her mother, and she said, "You better bring Brandon up here and tell her goodbye." And after weeks in the hospital, she passed away from this infection, from this car accident. So that was the first funeral of a young person I had ever attended. It rocked my world. We loved this little girl. It rocked Brandon's world. It rocked their family. It was a wonderful family. And now he's got survivor guilt, and this family's lost their daughter. And this family was so forgiving and so loving. They knew Brandon loved her. And now this boy, who had never had a traffic ticket, was staring down the barrel of criminal charges. And let me give you some pretty legal advice in case you don't know. Yes, you can go to prison for accidentally killing someone that you love. If you're drinking or taking drugs, they can file criminal charges against you. So let that sink in. So now this young man's got survivor guilt. He's got serious problems. He was guilty. And nobody needed a confession from him. He couldn't tell enough people how guilty he was. And that family embraced him. We sat on the front row of the funeral with that family. They loved Brandon deeply. And that is why they did not file those charges against him. So life goes on, folks. And I put this on here. I learned a lesson. Up, down, up, down, up, down. That is what it's like to be addicted. Addicted people try to get off these drugs. I'll explain how this works in a minute. But oftentimes they can't. Most of the time they cannot. Brandon would swear that he would never do it again, and then he would do it again. And we would go through this cycle, on, off, on, off, on, off. And it was so bizarre to me. I didn't believe that that was possible. Not my son. He had tons of willpower and a very high pain tolerance. And yet, he could not say no to the pull of these drugs. So fast forward, we went through 3 years of life like that. 3 years. And I went to my family doctor. He didn't know what to do. He said, you need to use tough love and threaten him. You're going to cut him off if he does it again. So at Christmas 2001, he fell off the wagon again. And I told him, I followed my doctor's advice. I said, if you do this one more time, you need to go away and you cannot see your family. And that was not the right thing that I should have done. But I didn't know what to do. We'd been to rehab. They didn't tell me that rehab, the workability of rehab, the success rate was 20%. Did y'all know that? Would you go to any doctor and have a surgery if they told you the success rate or survival rate was 20%? But that's what first-time rehab is, 20% success rate. We did the rehab thing. We did everything we needed to do. So fast forward, this is Valentine's Day, 2002. Brandon was going to school here by then. So we just had a wonderful family dinner with friends, and Brandon had put his little sister into the back seat in a car seat. He had a great time that night. And this is the last picture ever taken of him. The next day, he was going to come over to my house, and we were going to watch the OU-OSU basketball game. There's two things. Brandon and I were very close, but in particular, we loved riding motorcycles together. We rode on a lot of long trips together. He was an excellent driver. But we loved sports. And so that's what we were going to do. So the next day, I was at my office in downtown Oklahoma City at noon, and I got a phone call. And it was from Brandon. And he said, Dad, I can't make it tonight. After 3 years of him taking these drugs, I had become kind of a walking slur detector machine. At noon, I could tell he was on these drugs. And by the way, his drug of choice was a combination of opioids. Sometimes if he couldn't get an opioid, he would take Valiums. 2 different types of drugs. Always chase it with alcohol. That was his choice because he had become addicted. The chemistry of his brain had changed, and he didn't know it. I didn't know it either. I know it now. So I told Brandon, where are you at? Stay right there. He said, well, I'm in a restaurant. I'm in Edmond. I'm at Chili's. I said, stay right there. I'm coming to get you. And I hung up on him. And it took me about 5 minutes to get in my car, and I was racing to Edmond. My plan was to do exactly what I said I was going to do. I wasn't going to let anybody else get hurt. I had bought him a vehicle, and I knew that vehicle very well. I can still see it. When I got to Chili's, his vehicle wasn't there. So I called him, and he doesn't answer. I get his voicemail. I was going to tear into him and take his keys away and tell him to go away forever, which is the worst thing I could have done. Well, he wasn't ever at Chili's. I found out later. I was living in Oak Tree Country Club. They have a golf course and a restaurant. He was in that restaurant with a friend. And I talked to the bartender later. Brandon had an old, you remember those old flip phones? He shut his flip phone. He told his friend, my dad's coming. We got to get out of here. And, you know, before I got in my car, he was already dead, but I didn't know that till later. So I didn't know where he went. I went to my house finally at Oak Tree, and when I got 100 yards away, I could see police cars, and fire trucks, and ambulances, and I drove up on this motorcycle. That's my motorcycle. It used to be red, but it was laying in the grass. I didn't recognize it. All the plastic pieces are gone. It had hit a brick mailbox about 65 miles an hour. The speed limit was 20. Brandon was driving in my neighborhood, 100 yards from my house where we live, with his siblings. He was trying to beat me home. I don't know what he was gonna do. I guess he was gonna try to clean up in some fashion and convince me that he wasn't doing drugs and alcohol. But he was driving way too fast and he hit a brick mailbox and it just exploded. So what I saw was the motorcycle, I saw bricks all over the road, and I saw his red truck in the middle of the road. So I parked and I ran up there and the policeman grabbed me. "Who are you?" And I said, "That's my son's truck." And in my mind, I knew he had just killed some poor innocent guy on a motorcycle. That's what I thought happened. And the officer said, "No, sir, your son was driving that motorcycle. He hit the mailbox. And that guy was driving his truck." And then I see there's a young man sitting in the grass crying. And I'd never seen him before. You probably can guess who he was. He was the guy that always has the drugs to sell to his friends. You may have met people like that. He was the guy. So a policeman was very nice to me. He said, "Let me drive you to the hospital." A helicopter landed on the golf course and picked Brandon up. And they wouldn't tell me anything. They just said he's hurt pretty bad. So it seemed like an eternity. When I got to the hospital, that kid beat me to the hospital. I don't know how he did it. But now, when I get to the hospital, they tell me my son passed away. His death certificate said he died from blunt trauma to the back of his head. It was not the motorcycle that killed him. It was not the bricks in that mailbox that killed him. It was addiction. The disease of addiction killed him. That's what killed him. But it's not on his death certificate. That's not the way they write it up in this state. So this young man is upset, crying, and I asked him, "Who are you?" And he told me, "I'm Brandon's buddy." And he told me everything that happened. And I had friends by that time that showed up, and they later said, "I can't believe you weren't mad at that kid." I gave him a hug right there in the hospital with my Brandon's body laying right there, because I felt nothing but sympathy for him. He was no different than my son. He was sick. He had become addicted. He didn't have any path forward that he could see except sell drugs to make money. So that's the end of Brandon's story. He's buried in Seminole today, and that's where he'll stay. A young life wiped out because of one evening that he chose to take a pill that he didn't understand how it worked. And you know, I've written a lot of briefs and I've written a couple of books, but this is the first, but not last, obituary that I ever had to write. It's hard to put somebody's life in a very short thing. And I used the pre-addiction photo of Brandon. That's the Brandon I knew. He was always smiling until he got addicted. You have no idea how powerful this is unless you've seen it happen to someone you know, or unless you had it happen. So I'm going to deviate. How do we go from Oklahoma City to Africa? I wasn't doing very well. I was extremely depressed. I had other kids I had to raise. So a buddy of mine worked in Uganda, and he was trying to help the kids that, you may have heard of Joseph Kony. He's kidnapped over 20,000 young men and women. He makes the young women sex slaves, and the little boys, he makes them join his army, makes them child soldiers. They call them invisible children. My buddy worked over there, and he dragged me over there. Most people were afraid to go over there, and there was a terrible war going on there. But I had no fear, because I didn't really care if I lived or not. And so in November of 2002, I went to Uganda, and you know what? My eyes were opened up. I was feeling sorry for myself, and I saw those kids over there had problems that made my problems look small. And so if you haven't heard of Joseph Kony, Google him sometime. It's unbelievable the atrocities he committed. Who was going to stop him? The army couldn't catch him. They couldn't stop him. The president couldn't stop him. Well, these children paid the price for his crimes. But one little lady, and I'm not Catholic, I was raised in the Baptist church. But I get over there to Uganda, and I meet this little lady. She's at my house today, by the way. Sister Rosemary Narumbi. Nobody knew who she was then, but she was openly defying Joseph Kony. She was putting signs out all over the town because these children were being kidnapped in the dead of night. And they killed the parents. Sometimes they made the children kill the parents. They kidnapped the kids. Rosemary took them all in. She had no fear. She's a real hero. And so I met this lady, and on the flight back home, I thought, you know, we got to tell this story. This isn't right, and I need to quit moping about my problems. There's people in the world that got bigger problems than I do. It changed my life. And that was my first venture into trying to do nonprofits. And we formed, you can see her t-shirt, we formed a nonprofit called Pros for Africa. I represent the University of Oklahoma and occasionally OSU. And I know a lot of these football players. So I started taking these OU football players who were quite famous over to Africa and helped them raise money. And we started building schools and providing food and education to these kids. And we're still doing it today. That's Adrian Peterson, by the way, for you football fans. He went over there with me, and there's Sister Rosemary. We're about 10 miles from the South Sudan border right there. It's an amazing story, and guess what? We made a film. I ventured into filmmaking. We made a film, and you guys have quite a filmmaking school here, by the way, but we made a film called Sowing Hope. And we fund that school by selling purses made out of pop tabs. Like you buy a 7-Up, you know the little pop tab? We have school kids all over the country that collect pop tabs and mail them to us here in Oklahoma. And those children over there who have no way of making a living sew them together. And thus the name Sowing Hope. Why the name Hope? I'll tell you, I knew this after Brandon died. It's hard to live without hope. You can do it, but it's really hard. And Rosemary gave hope to those children. And she gave hope to me. She gave me some useful information that I'm not the worst off person on this planet. And that was a very valuable lesson to learn. She ended up becoming a CNN hero and a Time 100. If you haven't heard of that, she's one of the most famous women on this planet, and one of the most famous and vigorous advocates for the rights of women, children, and those who are poor and sick. Okay, now we've gone from Oklahoma City to Uganda. Now we're coming back to Oklahoma. This is a quote. In those 3 years when Brandon was sick, he would say it all the time, Dad, I wouldn't have started doing this if I knew I couldn't stop. It kind of made sense to me. I never warned him, so I spent the last 21 years going around giving speeches like this. I'm just telling you what I know, folks. And I'm going to show you scientific evidence of how addiction works. Because if you had put me in your seat when I was 20, 30 years old, you couldn't convince me I could get addicted. No way. I don't believe it. I also don't believe I can be hypnotized. Nobody's ever tried, but I just don't believe it. I've got so much willpower. Willpower doesn't matter. When science takes over and chemistry takes over, you lose every time. And I'm going to show you how it works. Some of the top scientists in the world are going to talk to you in just a minute. This is why he couldn't stop. Because the chemistry of his brain changed. Let me tell you, our brains have billions of neurons in it. It is a chemical and electrical machine. It's very complicated. And you mess with the chemistry of that brain, things happen. Usually bad things. That's what happened, and we know that now. People like me who grew up in Seminole and other people, we thought these are just bad people doing bad things. Would we say that to a diabetic? You know what diabetes is? Pancreas doesn't work anymore. You have to have insulin shots. Would we ever tell a diabetic, use more willpower and you won't need that insulin? Would we ever tell somebody that had a heart attack, use more willpower, get up? Cancer, use more willpower. No, these are recognized diseases. We know how they work. We know how to treat them. Addiction is a recognized disease by the medical community, but still most people don't know that. So I made another film. We won 3 Emmys for this film. It's called Killing Pain. And you can Google both those films, by the way, and watch them for free. if you like them, put them out on your social media, because we need to spread both those messages. Did I mention Sister Rosemary will be speaking here at this school on September 26th? I hope you all come that evening. You'll get to meet her, take pictures with her. She's a real healer. But we made this film years later, and I'm going to show you, what is it, Jeff, 6 minutes?
6 minutes.
I'm going to show you 6 minutes. These are some of the greatest experts in the United States of America. Some of them are from Oklahoma. They're going to explain to you in 6 minutes how addiction works. So bear with me and watch this very closely. You won't get to see this often.
If you get cancer or you get any disease, people don't look that.
Sorry, the speaker turned off. Connected here.
If I could sing or dance, this is the part. Try that again.
If you get cancer or you get any disease, people don't look down on you. They don't try to shame you. The patient doesn't feel ashamed. But when you become an addict, it's an ugly word. And the general public thinks you're a bad person. And maybe you deserve what you got. You really have to see your loved one get sick before you know the full truth of that statement.
I think one of the challenges with addiction is that for years, we weren't talking about what the real science was, that this was a medical condition. And part of that was because we couldn't see what was actually happening in the brain. We were looking at the symptoms of addiction. Families were watching a loved one who just couldn't seem to stop using. We would never look at a loved one who was struggling, for example, with an asthma attack and say, why don't you just breathe normally? The same is true with addiction. When you look at someone who's struggling with addiction and you say, why don't you just stop using? That's asking someone having an asthma attack to just make themselves breathe normally. We have to make sure that we actually look at the science, and that will begin to take away the stigma of addiction. What you struggle with when you struggle with opioid addiction is that your brain is chemically dependent on those opioids. Your brain is releasing chemicals, craving those opioids.
Or what happens when they take that pill is it changes the brain. Their brain chemistry is changed and their life is forever changed. The brain has this center that is natural and we want it to be there. It's called the reward center. And the reward center is the reason why when I eat a cheeseburger, I get a sensation of happiness. And that's why I eat another cheeseburger later on. It's because my brain has remembered, oh, that was a positive experience. You should do that again. It does that on purpose because the brain wants me to eat. The reward for that is small. When you take an opioid, it does the same thing, but it does it much, much stronger. And it lays down new pathways in your brain, and that causes you to seek out the substance again. But these drugs act on a receptor. Whenever I injured myself, the body releases a substance called endorphins. Those endorphins bind to those receptors in the brain to block pain temporarily. Opioids have hijacked that natural system, and they do it so much better. So you're feeding yourself more pain medicine to try and get that same feeling, and you're always chasing your brain. So it tells me that Mother Teresa taking these medications would get addicted. It's not a personality flaw, it's not a character flaw. This is a biological mechanism that happens.
If a patient has been on an opioid with a high enough dose for a long enough period of time, when they try and come off, there are acute symptoms that they'll experience, which many of us think of as a sort of a flu-like illness. People feel like they're going to die when they're running out of opioids.
Your brain is telling your body to seek out this substance just like it should seek out food and water and everything else you need to survive. The problem though is the priority. When you eat food, your body sends out a signal saying, hey, you should do that again sometime. But when it's with opioids, it sends it out that you need this immediately. And so there's a lot more priority on it. As you descend further into addiction, you really start to displace everything in your life to prioritize the addiction.
If we took the brain and drew a line we could divide it just easily into two parts. The prefrontal cortex, which is the part of our brain that is responsible for our learning and our judgment and our reasoning ability and all those things. Well, the limbic system is the more primitive, responsible for sex instinct and hunger and thirst and those kinds of things. Addiction sort of hijacks the limbic system of our brain, the part of our brain that's responsible for pleasure and euphoria. When that part of the brain is triggered, the instincts, the impulses are very significant. And so what we think happens is the prefrontal cortex, the things I should be telling myself about why I shouldn't take this. I'm sober 6 months, I'm just about to get custody, I'm doing well at work, I'm doing this, that part of the brain that should come into play does not come into play. It's right there with eating and hydrating and sex instinct and aggressive instinct. It is like drawing breath. It's gonna happen, you gotta do it. If you've not ever grappled with this deal, that is unimaginable. Because for most of us, we go throughout the day fighting off impulses, whether it's another slice of pizza or another Coke or another whatever. And so we cannot begin to grasp what it must be like to not suppress an urge. To be addicted by definition means that those instincts are now screaming that you must get that substance inside of you. And it has no rationality to it. So in every way, it is an illness. I think it's just hard for us to fathom because we, as humans, have this belief in control. And evolved people have it, and those that are not as evolved don't. And I think we kind of see it that way, that if you were, if you had more willpower, if you were raised better, if you, whatever, that you could exercise control over this. And I promise you, none of my patients suffer from a lack of willpower.
And science proves that opioids are addictive. These drugs did what they were designed to do. They changed the chemistry of the brains of millions of people. Their stated objective was to kill pain. They've caused far more pain than they've helped.
So I hope you guys learned something from that. Liz, tell me how much time I have left.
The class doesn't end until 4:40, so.
Okay. If I need to shut up, give me the signal. I'm gonna throw some data out for you that I've learned. 136 people in this country are dying every day from this one drug, opioids. And what is an opioid? Well, it started out, it's a plant called the poppy plant. And if you have a field full of poppies, they grow them in certain places. Afghanistan, parts of India, Tasmania is a huge supplier of opioids. But these poppy fields are very beautiful. Animals will occasionally go in there. They don't come out. They eat these poppies, and it stops their breathing. And that's exactly what's happening to these 136 people here. That's one person almost every 11 minutes. That's somebody's family member, someone who shouldn't have died. Now, these opioids, starting in '96, started flooding our country. And 96 to 2001, by the way, the darker the red is, the bigger the opioid problem. 2003, look at it seeping across the country from east to west. Now Oklahoma turned red in 2005. It's bad. Redder. Oklahoma, 2002, 2014. It took over the country. I think we lost in the Vietnam War about, if I remember right, about 78,000 lives over like 15, 16 years. And America thought that was outrageous. I grew up during the Vietnam War. I thought it was outrageous. In 2021, we lost 106,000 plus people to opioid overdoses. In 2022, it went up to 109. It went up during the pandemic. COVID-19, everything got worse. And we haven't seen the end of it. What does synthetic mean? It means it's man-made. Opioids have been around for over 5,000 years. We've got tablets from Mesopotamia where they talked about opioids as medicine. They were addicted then, they're addicted today. But guess what? Science is powerful. They can now make synthetic, man-made opioids. They're not from the poppy plant. They're just a bunch of chemicals they mixed up. You might have heard of some of these. Have you heard of fentanyl? Let me tell you, fentanyl is 50 times stronger than heroin. And that's kind of the one everybody is afraid of. Oh, not anymore. Yeah, you ought to be afraid of heroin, but I'm just saying, 50 times. That's like saying, I'm afraid of rattlesnakes. I've almost stepped on one. But a cobra is worse. I don't know that it's 50 times worse, but just remember that this stuff is incredibly powerful. And they're now making other ones that you probably haven't heard of. There's something called carfentanil, and it's 100 times stronger than heroin. And you might say, well, why do we need them this strong? Because there is a market for it. That's why. Capitalism is a wonderful thing. I'm a capitalist. I make a living. But the bad guys are making a living off it too. These are not good people. They're killing people. They're selling drugs and they're killing people, and they know it. Here's what's happening. Last year, 2 little 16-year-old girls in Ohio thought they'd do something really wild. Now, how wild does this sound to you? They wanted to smoke their first joint. They bought a joint, one joint, marijuana, on the street from friends. They smoked it. They both died. Why? Because the makers, the people that sold this marijuana on the street, had sprayed it with a little water that contained a tiny amount of fentanyl. And they both died. This is happening all over the country. They're putting fentanyl in everything. I'm going to show you some examples in a minute. Now, who would have thought? And I've been dealing with this for 21 years. I've been studying it. I read about this every night because I'm obsessed with it. I'm a student of this. I ask myself, why would these bad guys want to kill their customers? They lose money. The answer? They don't want to kill their customers. They don't want to kill you or anybody else. They want you to get addicted. It is incredibly addictive, and you won't even know it, theoretically. You might be smoking a joint. If you get it from the same people and they're doing the same thing to it, and all of a sudden you start behaving like those videos just told you about. You start, when you don't smoke that joint, you feel like you have the flu. You feel like you're gonna die. You are now addicted because somebody slipped a drug in there that you didn't know about. That's what they're trying to do. Why did they kill these 2 little girls? They're not very good at what they're doing. These are not PhDs. These are not doctors. This isn't Pfizer. We don't have the FDA regulating these criminals. They're not very good at it, and they're accidentally killing people. And it's happening all over this country. And I hope you remember what I say here. Test me on this. Next year, and the year after, and the year after, the body count's gonna go up. You're gonna see people probably fall victim to this. And it's not just marijuana. They're putting it in everything. They're putting it in everything. Here's a couple of numbers. In 2019, we went from 54 deaths to 299 deaths by 21, a 454% increase. This data takes a year or two to roll out, but the data is going up, and it's getting worse every year. Now that's a penny for scale. That's enough fentanyl to kill you. If you can imagine, take 6 of the tiniest grains of sand from a really nice beach. I mean, put it in your hand, 6 grains of sand. Or on the other hand, put 9 grains of sand. Fentanyl of that size, the 6 will render you where they could do surgery on you, 9 kill you. That's how small this is. That's how powerful it is. And they're making it stronger all the time. Okay. Students all over this country are being fed a line of lies, a bunch of lies. Adderall and Ritalin. There are doctors, there are people that swear by it. In fact, they've given it a name. They call it the study drug. We have students, we have law students, we have med students, we have college students, we have high school students taking this. Well, there's a market out there. They're making fake pills, counterfeit Adderall, counterfeit Ritalin. You can buy on the internet, apparently, a pill press. It's not illegal. And you can press and make your own pills. You can put stamps on them. See those stamps? You can't tell the difference. So here's the deal. If you don't go to Walgreens with your prescription and get your medicine and open that bottle for the first time, you don't know what you're taking. If you take a pill from your friend, how many of us have taken a pill from our friend? I've taken Advil from friends. Everybody's probably done that. But if you take a pill today and you didn't see it come directly from Walgreens, you're playing with fire. I don't know how statistically likely it is. It doesn't happen every day, but it happens, and you're at risk. Our children are at risk. And I'll tell you, this is a funny deal too. My kids, sometimes they didn't want to take their medicine. It tasted bad. It tastes terrible, Daddy. Whatever. They don't want to take their medicine. Straight from the doctor, or the mother, or the father. They don't want to take it. But I've observed this. Kids today will take anything their friends tell them to take. Try it. It's like they think their friends have a PhD in chemistry. And do you guys know what I'm talking about? You've seen this. You trust your friends. But they don't have a PhD in chemistry. It's just hearsay. We've got to be aware of that today. It's a new phenomenon, and not enough people know about it. That's why I'm talking about it. I'm trying to give you a heads up about this. Now I'm talking about body count. These body counts, the death count is enormous, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. You all have heard of the tip of the iceberg? The tip of the iceberg means you see that up here, but you don't see this huge iceberg under the water. Most of it's under the water. The number of deaths is relatively small to the number of miserable people, family members. Look at my family. My family was almost destroyed by one death. One death. It's like when you shatter a glass and it spirals out. That's what happens. You know, we think today, because nobody's going to fess up there, we think there's 4 to 5 million people addicted to opioids. 467,000 people addicted to heroin. And by the way, almost all of these started out taking a pill from their doctor. They got the opioids from Walgreens or CVS. That one of the doctors in that film that you saw, he's treating addicts for a living every day. He's never had a patient that didn't get addicted from a doctor. I couldn't believe it when he testified. I put him on the witness stand during the opioid trial, first opioid trial in America. I was surprised by that. I just thought all these heroin addicts started with heroin. Not true. It's incredibly powerful. Here's another way of looking at the pyramid, the iceberg. On the left-hand column, one person who dies in 2015, for everyone that died, 18 had a substance use disorder. They just hadn't died yet, but they weren't happy. I'll tell you, it's not a happy life. For every one death, 62 people had a substance use disorder involving prescription opioids. For every one death, 377 people were misusing prescription opioids that year. For every one death, 2,946 people were using prescription opioids in the past year. It has grown enormously because the pharmaceutical industry advertised it falsely. It's no longer being addictive. Now they've retracted that now. They've stopped doing that. They've all admitted it's wrong. And they paid billions of dollars in damages out, but it hadn't brought back any of these dead people, and it hasn't brought peace to any of these family members that are suffering because their loved ones are addicted. too late for them. And for those loved ones who are alive and suffering like my family was, let me just tell you about this. I hope it never happens to you guys. You could get sick, you could get cancer, you could get diabetes, you could get a disease. Here's what'll happen. People will hear about it. Your friends will put their arms around you. They'll come over to your house. I've had sicknesses in my family. My neighbors will bring over some food and they'll comfort you. And that feels good. When your son gets addicted, there's nobody talking about it. Nobody's bringing food over to the house. They won't talk about it because it's like, it's a shameful thing. That's what America thinks. And it's a very lonely life when your child is sick, not with asthma or diabetes or cancer, but with addiction. And they're both diseases. They're both diseases. They should be treated the same way. I will say this, addiction masquerades. It's a disease that masquerades as bad behavior. Yes, my son did a bad thing. He was at a party. One of his football playing buddies ordered him a drink and a pill. You know, he has a car accident. That's against the law. That's different than cancer or diabetes. So it often starts with bad behavior. But these people didn't know they could get addicted. People don't believe they can get addicted. But it happens. It happens every day. And we've done surveys. Less than 20% of Americans are willing to associate closely with somebody as a friend or a neighbor or a colleague if they're addicted. A lot of people can't even get help for this. And the stigma, they're afraid to tell their boss or their doctor or their preacher that they are sick with this, whereas if they had cancer, they would be comfortable sharing that. We don't have enough treatment. If you guys get sick, whether you have insurance or whether you have Sooner Care, which is state-funded health care, either way, you're gonna get treatment in America. But not for addiction. It's really hard to get addiction treatment. And I've got 2 kids I'm paying for rehab. They're not my kids. They're kids I ran into. I've got 2 kids in rehab right now. And believe me, it's hard to get them in. We don't have enough. We don't have enough rehab. We don't have enough doctors. You don't want to get sick like this, folks. And we're filling our prisons up with people that got convicted because they are selling drugs or using or possessing drugs. And that is not the way. We cannot lock up everybody who's going to get addicted. And minimum, it costs $23,000 taxpayer dollars to lock one person up for a year. That's a minimum. But if they're sick, it costs more. They have to take care of them in the jail. So it's really a mess. We've got to figure out a different way to do it. People who have diabetes, 88% of the time get treatment in this country. People who have hypertension, 75% of the time can get treatment. Opioid use disorder, only 12.5% of those people can get treatment. And they're sick, believe me, they're very sick. It's a real problem. There is hope on the way. There are incredible drugs that can treat this. There is a drug called Suboxone, and it's a miracle drug. If you take Suboxone and you're addicted to opioids, Suboxone gloms onto those receptors in the brain, and the opioids don't work. People don't know about it. People have trouble getting it. So after we settled the case against Purdue Pharmaceutical, which kind of started this whole thing, the increase in opioids, about $200 million went to create this new center called the National Center for Addiction Studies and Treatment. And it's located in Tulsa at the medical school. I'm an adjunct professor there. I teach med students about addiction, just like I'm teaching you guys. Believe it or not, folks, most doctors are not well versed in this. Unless you're a psychiatrist, you don't get much education on addiction. And that's a problem. We're trying to change that. We're trying to change that right now. And I think we will change it. But isn't it amazing that we have a drug? Can you imagine if you had an infection on your hand, you had a cut, you got a bad infection, or you have a terrible cold, and you're suffering, and you go to your doctor, Doc, can you give me some penicillin or an antibiotic? And the doctor says, you know, I don't believe I don't believe in using antibiotic for infections. You'd think he's a quack, wouldn't you? About 80% of our physicians in this country don't know that we have some miracle drugs to treat addiction. And they've picked up a common phrase. I've talked to a bunch of them, and they say, you know, I don't know that I want to trade one drug for another. It's like penicillin, it will help. And this isn't debatable, this is a scientific fact. It's just our doctors don't really study addiction. And people think they can't make money for it because insurance companies usually won't cover addiction. That's changing, that we passed a parity law, which means equal. Just recently in this state, it really hadn't fully kicked in, but that's changing. We're trying to get help for people. I'm trying to get insurance coverage, but this foundation here, I'll just leave you with this. There's hope on the horizon, and I hope that if your family members or your friends, I hope you guys don't ever get sick. But there's hope on the horizon. We've got some of the best scientists in the world. They're doing incredible research. They're gonna find two things, and I hope they find it in my lifetime. They probably won't. But they're gonna find a non-addictive painkiller. They're gonna find it, they're working on it. And number two, they're gonna find a way to cure addiction. And that, I'm pretty sure that won't happen in my lifetime, but they're working on it. And they're gonna find it. It wasn't too long ago we didn't have cell phones, you know? But science works. We're making great progress. And so I'll leave you guys with this. If you ever have any questions, you can go to my website, Fighting Addiction Through Education. Education is the key. And if you need help, we'll find a way to get you help. You can communicate with us that way. But I just want to end on this. You guys can do anything. You can do anything. You're at a great school, my favorite college president. You guys can do anything as long as you stay between the lines. Don't let this drug, any drug, hijack your life. If I can do it from Seminole, Oklahoma, you guys can do whatever you want to do. And I'm so glad to have had you as an audience. You guys are very attentive, and I wish you all the best of luck through your life.